2:13 in the morning, the Norwegian Sea. The destroyer, USS Winston Churchill, held its station 200 miles west of the Lofoten Islands. This was not a routine patrol. The ship was tracking an acoustic anomaly that should not have existed. The crew did not know it yet, but they were about to encounter something that defied every law of naval warfare. The North Atlantic is a graveyard of secrets. In these waters, the pressure is enough to flatten a modern submarine like a soda can. But something was moving in the dark. It was moving fast. It was moving up. How could a contact the size of a city block be ascending from the abyss at 80 knots? That was the question that would soon haunt the Defense Headquarters facility. Inside the Combat Information Center, the air was cold and smelled of ozone and stale coffee. The only sound was the low hum of cooling fans and the rhythmic pulse of the sonar suite. The room was bathed in the dim blue light of tactical displays. Sonar Petty Officer Second Class Miller stared at his screen. He did not move. He did not breathe. His headset was pressed tight against his ears. He was listening to a sound that made his skin crawl. The contact was directly below the keel. It was 6,000 meters down. That was far below the crush depth of any known vessel. It was also moving at 80 knots. Miller keyed his internal radio. His voice was steady but thin. He spoke to the tactical action officer. "Sir, I have a submerged contact. Bearing 0, range 0, depth 6,000 meters. Target is ascending." The tactical action officer leaned over the console. He looked at the waterfall display. "Miller, check your calibration. Nothing lives down there, and nothing moves that fast." "Calibration is green, sir," Miller replied. "The signature is massive. It is larger than an aircraft carrier, and it is coming straight for us." The officer looked at the digital depth reading. It was changing every second. 5,800 meters. 5,600 meters. The object was climbing at a rate that would destroy the hull of any torpedo ever built. 2:16 in the morning. The bridge was notified immediately. On the upper decks, the wind howled across the radar masts. The sea was a chaotic mess of white foam and black water. The crew of the naval warship had no idea that they were standing directly over a physical impossibility. Commander Sarah Vance entered the Combat Information Center 30 seconds later. She did not look at the screens first. She looked at Miller. She saw the sweat on his upper lip despite the cold air. "Classify it?" Vance said. "I cannot, Commander," Miller replied. "It is not a foreign military submarine. It has no propeller noise, no reactor hum. It sounds like the ocean itself is moving." Vance looked at the display. The contact was now at 4,000 meters. It was rising like a bubble. But bubbles do not have a mass of 100,000 tons. This was a solid object. It was a physical presence that was displacing thousands of tons of water every second. "Go to Condition 2, Vance ordered. "I want the hull checked for active pings. If this thing is a weapon, we are sitting in its shadow." 2:20 in the morning. The ship began to vibrate. It was not the engines. It was a low-frequency resonance coming from deep below the water. It was a sound that felt like a physical weight in the chests of every sailor on board. The naval warship was a powerful weapon of war, but in this moment, it felt like a toy floating on a very thin surface. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:22 in the morning. The sonar suite of the USS Winston Churchill. Petty Officer Miller pressed his hands against his headset. He was trying to isolate the sound. Usually, a submarine sounds like a machine. You hear the rhythmic beat of a propeller. You hear the whine of high-pressure pumps. You hear the flow of water over a metal skin. This was different. The sound was a low, resonant thrum. It sounded like a cathedral organ playing a note below the range of human hearing. It was constant. It was perfect. Miller looked at the frequency analyzer. The signal was a solid line. There were no harmonics. There was no mechanical friction. Miller spoke to the commander. "Ma'am, I am looking at the displacement data. The water pressure is spiking. This object is pushing a massive volume of water. It is not just a ship. It is an environmental event. Commander Vance stood behind him. Is it a biological contact? Could it be a whale? Miller shook his head. Negative. A blue whale is 30 meters long. This contact is over 400 meters in length. It is wider than a football field, and it is moving at 80 knots. No living creature can sustain that speed at this depth. 2:25 in the morning, 50 nautical miles to the east, the foreign military destroyer moved through the heavy swells. Inside its own darkened bridge, Captain Second Rank Viktor Levchenko stared at a green radar sweep. The foreign military forces had been shadowing the naval warship for 3 days. It was a standard game of cat and mouse, but the game had changed. The foreign military sonar chief reported a massive acoustic event. They called it the poltergeist. It was a signature they had recorded only once before, near the Kuril Trench. Captain Levchenko spoke to his executive officer. The foreign military forces are sitting still. They have dropped to 5 knots. Why? The executive officer looked at the data. They are hovering directly over the anomaly, Captain. Their sonar is active. They are pinging the abyss with everything they have. They are not pinging a submarine, Levchenko said. They are afraid. Look at their formation. They are turning their hull to present the smallest target. They think they are under attack. 2:28 in the morning, the Norwegian Sea. Back on the naval warship, the vibration was getting worse. In the galley, metal trays began to rattle against the shelves. In the berthing areas, sailors woke up to the sound of the hull groaning. It was the sound of a ship being squeezed. The command center facility was a hive of controlled motion. The tactical action officer was coordinating with the engine room. They were trying to maintain a hover, but the water beneath them was becoming turbulent. Depth is 2,000 meters, Miller announced. His voice was higher now. It is accelerating. 90 knots. 100 knots. It is coming up like a missile. Commander Vance gripped the edge of the console. Clear the deck. I want all personnel away from the center line of the ship. If that thing hits us, it will cut us in half. The tactical action officer looked at his screen. Captain, we have a new problem. The foreign military destroyer is increasing speed. They are at 30 knots and closing. They think we are engaging a target. Vance did not look away from the sonar display. Radio, the foreign forces. Tell them we are experiencing a navigational hazard. Tell them to stay back. The foreign forces are not responding, ma'am, the radio operator said. They have locked their fire control radar onto us. The object was now 1,500 meters below the ship. It was a mountain of silent energy. It was rising through the dark water, with a purpose that no one in the room could understand. The sonar screen flashed red. The signal was so strong it was saturating the sensors. 1,000 meters, Miller whispered. It is right under us. 2:30 in the morning. The Norwegian Sea. The USS Winston Churchill was no longer just vibrating. It was shaking. In the Combat Information Center, Commander Vance felt the deck plates shudder beneath her boots. It was a rhythmic, heavy thumping. It felt like the heartbeat of a giant. The sonar screen was a solid wall of green light. The energy from the contact was overwhelming the ship's sensors. Miller had to turn down the gain on his headset to avoid permanent hearing damage. The sound was no longer a thrum. It was a physical roar that seemed to bypass the ears and vibrate directly in the skull. 700 meters, Miller shouted over the noise. It is slowing down. But it is still coming up. Speed is 40 knots. It is going to breach. Vance looked at the tactical action officer. All engines ahead full. Right full rudder. We need to get out of its path. The officer hesitated. Ma'am, if we move now, we might put ourselves directly over the bow of the Admiral Kulakov. They are less than 5 miles away. We do not have a choice, Vance said. If that thing hits our keel, this ship will be at the bottom of the Norwegian Sea in 60 seconds. Move us, now. The Winston Churchill groaned as its powerful turbines kicked into high gear. The ship leaned heavily to the right as it began a desperate turn. The wake of the destroyer cut a jagged white line through the black water. 2:33 in the morning. On the bridge of the Admiral Kulakov, Captain Levchenko watched the infrared feed on a large wall monitor. The water around the military ship was boiling. It was not from heat. It was from pressure. Huge plumes of white water were erupting around the hull of the Churchill. The military forces are fleeing, the foreign military executive officer said. They are at full power. They are terrified of whatever is under them. Levchenko gripped the railing of the bridge. Look at the sonar. The contact is not following them. It is maintaining its original course. It is heading for the surface, right where the naval warship was sitting a moment ago. Is it a surfacing submarine? The officer asked. No, Levchenko replied. The signature is too wide. It is a tectonic event, or it is something the military forces have built and lost control of. Signal the fleet. Tell them we have a probable weapons test gone wrong in Sector 4. 2:36 in the morning. Back inside the naval warship, the change in depth was being read aloud like a countdown. 500 meters, Miller called out. 400. It is massive. It is nearly 500 meters long. Commander, the displacement is impossible. The sea level is rising around the ship. Vance looked at the closed-circuit television feed of the ocean surface. The water was mounding. A massive dome of dark water was rising out of the sea. It looked like a liquid mountain. It was hundreds of meters wide. The foreign military ship is still closing, the radio operator warned. They are at 4,000 yards. They have their gun mounts trained on us. Ignore them, Vance said. Keep our cameras on that water. I want every sensor on this ship recording what comes out of that hole. The dome of water grew higher. It reached 10 meters, then 20. The surface of the Norwegian Sea was being pushed upward by a force that defied gravity. Inside the sonar room, the sound suddenly stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the roar. Miller looked at his screen. The contact was at 0 depth. It is here, Miller whispered. The mountain of water began to break. 2:38 in the morning. The Norwegian Sea. The Russian destroyer Admiral Kulakov cut through the heavy swells at 30 knots. On the bridge, Captain Levchenko watched the infrared monitors. The screen showed a massive thermal bloom on the surface of the water. It was exactly where the USS Winston Churchill had been moments before. The American ship was now a mile to the west, and turning hard. Levchenko spoke to his gunnery officer. Lock the main battery. I want a firing solution on the American ship, and prepare the anti-submarine rockets. The officer hesitated. Captain, we are in international waters. They have not shown hostile intent. They are testing something, Levchenko said. His voice was cold. Look at that displacement. That is not a natural phenomenon. It is a signature of a massive underwater hull. If they are deploying a new class of vessel, we must know what it is. 2:41 in the morning. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Winston Churchill, the tactical display was cluttered. A flashing red icon represented the Admiral Kulakov. It was closing the distance rapidly. The electronic warfare officer looked up. Ma'am, we are being painted. The Russian ship has its fire control radar locked on us. They are preparing to engage. Commander Vance did not flinch. Bridge. This is the CIC. Do not illuminate the Russians. Keep our sensors focused on the anomaly. We are not starting a war over a sonar ghost. It is not a ghost, Commander, Miller said. He was leaning forward, staring at the sonar waterfall. The object has stopped its ascent. It is holding position at 10 meters below the surface. It is sitting right between us and the Russians. Vance keyed the bridge radio. Communications. Open a channel to the Admiral Kulakov. Use the bridge-to-bridge distress frequency. A moment later, the radio crackled with static. A voice spoke in heavily accented English. USS Winston Churchill. This is Admiral Kulakov. You are conducting unauthorized weapons testing in open waters. You will state your intentions, or we will be forced to defend our sector. Vance took the handset. Admiral Kulakov. This is Commander Vance. We are not testing weapons. We have a navigational hazard at our position. I advise you to change course and maintain a distance of 5 miles. Negative, the Russian captain replied. We see the water displacement. You are hiding a vessel beneath the surface. If you do not surface your contact, we will use depth charges to force it up. 2:44 in the morning. The tension in the room was a physical weight. The Winston Churchill was trapped between a Russian destroyer with a hair trigger and an underwater object that defied physics. The tactical officer checked his screen. "Ma'am, the Russians are slowing down. They are preparing to launch an anti-submarine mortar. They are going to hit the object. If they hit that thing, the shockwave will damage our hull," Vance said. "Miller, what is the object doing?" Miller shook his head. "It is silent. It is just waiting." "But Commander, I am getting a reading on the magnetometer. The magnetic field around that object is off the charts. It is warping the Earth's field in this sector." On the bridge, the lookout shouted, the mountain of water between the two ships began to glow. A faint, bioluminescent blue light pulsed from beneath the waves. It was not the light of a ship, it was the light of a star. "The Russians are launching," the tactical officer screamed. The Admiral Kulakov fired. 2 RBU-6000 rockets streaked into the air. They curved over the water and plunged toward the center of the glowing dome. 2:46 in the morning. The Norwegian Sea. The anti-submarine rockets from the Admiral Kulakov hit the center of the glowing dome. There was no explosion. There was no plume of fire or spray of shrapnel. Instead, there was a silent flash of white light that turned the night into day for a single second. The rockets simply vanished into the glow as if they had never existed. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Winston Churchill, the sonar petty officer Miller cried out. He pulled his headset off and threw it on the console. The signal just spiked. It is not just an object anymore. It is absorbing the kinetic energy of the impact. Commander Vance gripped the back of the command chair. "General quarters. This is not a drill. All hands to battle stations." The alarm began to scream through the narrow hallways of the destroyer. It was a rhythmic, piercing sound that sent hundreds of sailors into a sprint. Steel hatches were slammed shut and locked. The ship was being sealed for combat. 2:49 in the morning. On the bridge of the Russian destroyer, the atmosphere was one of controlled panic. Captain Levchenko stared at his weapon displays. The status lights for the rocket launcher were flashing amber. The fire control officer spoke with urgency. "Captain, the rockets reached the target coordinates, but there was no detonation. Our sensors indicate a total suppression of the explosive charges. It is as if the physics of the blast were canceled out." "The Americans," Levchenko growled. "They have deployed a high-frequency dampening field. They are protecting their asset with a technology we have never seen. Captain, the American destroyer is now illuminating us. They have a fire control lock on our bridge. Load the cruise missiles," Levchenko ordered. "If they wish to hide their secrets behind a shield, we will see how much pressure that shield can take." Prepare to fire on the Winston Churchill. 2:52 in the morning. The Winston Churchill was now a fully armed hornet's nest. The crew moved with the cold efficiency of years of training, but the environment around them was breaking down. The magnetic distortion Miller had reported was now visible to the naked eye. Static electricity began to dance along the metal surfaces of the Combat Information Center. Small sparks jumped between the buttons on the consoles. The hair on the arms of the technicians stood on end. In the overhead, the emergency lights began to flicker and hum. The tactical action officer looked at his screen. "Commander, we have a missile lock from the Russian ship. They are 10 seconds from a launch sequence. We are in a classic standoff." Vance did not look at the tactical screen. She was watching the live video of the ocean. The dome of water was no longer rising. It was vibrating. The bioluminescent blue light was pulsing faster now. It looked like a strobe light beneath the waves. "Commander," Miller said. His voice was a whisper. "The object is no longer just sitting there. It is expanding. The internal pressure is rising at a geometric rate. It is going to break the surface in less than 90 seconds. Vance keyed the ship-wide circuit. "All hands. Brace for shock. Secure all loose gear. We are at the point of no return." The two most powerful navies in the world were staring at each other over the barrel of a loaded gun. Between them was something that did not belong to either of them. The ocean was about to open. 2:54 in the morning. The bridge of the Admiral Kulakov Captain Levchenko felt the vibration of the missile canister's opening. It was a heavy, metallic clunk that echoed through the steel hull. His hand hovered over the launch authorization key. He looked at the American ship through the digital long-range cameras. He saw its lights flickering against the pulsing blue glow of the anomaly. "I will not be the first to lose a ship today," Levchenko said. "Targeting is steady," the weapons officer replied. "The American interceptors are active. They are ready to counter." "Fire," Levchenko ordered. The Russian destroyer jerked as a Caliber cruise missile surged from its cell. A pillar of white smoke and orange fire lit up the deck. The missile roared into the sky, then dipped low to the water. It began its sea-skimming flight toward the Winston Churchill. It was moving at 500 miles per hour. It was a messenger of war. 2:54 and 30 seconds. The Combat Information Center of the Winston Churchill. The tactical display flashed a new icon. It was a red triangle. It was moving fast. "Vampire! Vampire!" the tactical action officer shouted. "Missile inbound. Bearing 080. Range 5 miles. Commander Vance felt the adrenaline surge. "Engage. Launch Sea Sparrow." The ship shook as the interceptor missile left the rail. It was a streak of white light against the black sky. "Radar lock is erratic," the electronic warfare officer said. "The blue light is interfering with the guidance systems. We are losing the track." "Keep the lock," Vance ordered. "Manual override if you have to. Do not let that missile hit us." The close-in weapon system on the starboard side of the Winston Churchill began to rotate. The Gatling gun pointed its 6 barrels at the horizon. It began to spin with a high-pitched whine that could be heard throughout the ship. It was the last line of defense. 2:54 and 45 seconds. The two missiles were miles apart. They were closing at a combined speed of over 1,000 miles per hour. Between them lay the glowing dome of water. The water was no longer liquid. It was a shimmering curtain of energy. Miller stared at his sonar display. He saw the contact. It was no longer at 10 meters. It was at 0. "It is out," Miller said. The sound was not an explosion. It was a vacuum. Every person on the Winston Churchill felt the air being sucked out of their lungs. The atmospheric pressure dropped in a split second. The wind around the ship reversed direction. It was being pulled toward the anomaly. 2:55 in the morning. The Russian missile entered the space above the dome. The American interceptor followed it a second later. Neither missile detonated. They did not crash. They reached the center of the blue glow and simply ceased to move. They were frozen in space. The fire from their engines continued to burn in bright orange bursts. But the missiles did not travel an inch. They were trapped in a bubble of frozen time. The sea below them collapsed. The mountain of water became a perfect, circular hole in the ocean. It was 500 meters wide. It was deep. It was black. At the bottom of the hole, a light began to grow. It was not blue anymore. It was a pure, blinding white. It was the color of a dying star. The radar screens on both ships went black. The digital displays flickered and died. The hum of the engines was replaced by a total, absolute silence. The silence was heavy. It was a weight that pressed against the ears of every sailor on both ships. Commander Vance looked through the thick glass of the bridge. She saw the Russian missile suspended in the air. Its tail was still spitting sparks of orange flame, but the sparks did not fall. They stayed in the air. They looked like jewels of fire hanging in the dark. The ocean was gone. Where the water had been, there was only a void. A perfect circle of nothingness. "What is that?" the helmsman whispered. Nobody answered him. There were no words for what they were seeing. The white light at the center of the hole began to rise. It did not move like a ship. It moved like a thought. It was instantaneous. 2:56 in the morning. The Norwegian Sea. The heartbeat of the USS Winston Churchill stopped. It was not a gradual failure. It was an instantaneous erasure of all power. The high-pitched whine of the cooling fans died. The glowing tactical displays flickered once and vanished into blackness. The red emergency lights did not kick in. The ship was plunged into a dark so absolute that the sailors could not see their own hands in front of their faces. Commander Vance stood on the bridge. She felt the silence like a physical weight. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the bridge crew, and the distant, muffled slop of the sea against the hull. "Status," Vance said. Her voice sounded small in the darkness. "Nothing, ma'am," the helmsman replied. "No steering, no engines, no backup power. It is like the batteries were sucked dry in a single second." Vance looked through the bridge windows. The foreign military missile and the military forces interceptor were still there. They were still frozen in the air, 100 feet above the water, but they were changing. The solid metal of the missile casings was becoming translucent. The orange fire from their engines was fading into a pale violet glow. Then, without a sound, they simply dissolved. They turned into a fine, glittering dust that fell toward the water like snow. 2:56 and 30 seconds. A mile away, the foreign military vessel suffered the same fate. Captain Levchenko stood on his darkened bridge. He watched as his pride, his most advanced weapon, was erased from the sky. He felt the cold air of the Norwegian Sea rushing through the open bridge doors. The ship was dead in the water. It was no longer a predator. It was a drifting piece of steel. The military forces, his executive officer whispered. Did they use an E, M, P? No, Levchenko said. He was looking at the center of the ocean hole. Look at the water. This was not the military forces. 2:57 in the morning. The white light at the center of the void finally reached the surface. It was not a flash. It was a structure. It rose from the black hole in a slow, majestic ascent. It was a massive, multifaceted spire of what looked like polished obsidian and liquid silver. It was 500 meters tall. It was 300 meters wide at the base. It had no windows. It had no visible engines. It had no markings of any nation on Earth. The structure did not stop at the surface. It continued to rise until its base was hovering 10 meters above the waves. The hole in the ocean began to fill. The water rushed back in with a thunderous roar, creating a chaotic surge of white foam. But the structure remained perfectly still. It was unaffected by the wind or the waves. The bioluminescent blue light from before was gone. In its place was a soft, white radiance that emanated from the very skin of the object. It illuminated the two destroyers. It turned the black water into a sea of milk. Inside the Combat Information Center of the naval warship, Petty Officer Miller fumbled for a battery-powered flashlight. He clicked it on and pointed it at his sonar console. The screen was dead, but he didn't need it. "Commander," Miller shouted toward the bridge. Vance ran back into the CIC. "Hearing what, Miller?" "The sound," he said. He looked terrified. "It is not in the water anymore. It is in the air. It is in the ship." Vance listened. It was a vibration, a low, harmonic chord that resonated through the steel of the hull. It felt like a voice, but there were no words. It was a frequency that felt like a command. It was a demand for silence. The two most powerful warships in the North Atlantic were paralyzed. Their weapons were gone. Their electronics were fried. They were two iron tubs floating in the shadow of something that did not belong in their world. The structure began to rotate. Slowly, silently, a single beam of green light shot out from its apex. It did not hit the naval warship. It did not hit the foreign military vessel. It pointed straight up into the heavy cloud cover of the Norwegian night. The clouds began to part. 2:58 in the morning. The Norwegian Sea. The green beam of light was a solid pillar of energy. It pierced the heavy Atlantic clouds like a needle through silk. Above the layer of gray mist, a circle of clear sky appeared. For the first time in 3 days, the stars were visible. They were cold and distant. They did not seem to belong to the same world as the two dead destroyers. Commander Vance stood on the bridge wing of the USS Winston Churchill. She held a pair of manual binoculars to her eyes. The lenses were cold against her face. Without the electronic zoom of the ship's cameras, the spire looked even more terrifying. It was not entirely solid. "It is translucent," Vance whispered to herself. She could see the white radiance of the core through the dark outer skin. The structure looked like it was made of frozen deep ocean water. Inside the spire, shapes were moving. They were not people. They were geometric patterns of light that shifted and pulsed in time with the green beam. "Ma'am," the helmsman said. He was leaning out of the bridge door. "We are drifting. The current is pulling us toward the base of the structure. We are 300 meters away. We have no way to steer." Vance looked at the black water between the ship and the spire. The USS Winston Churchill was 6,800 tons of steel, but it was being pulled like a toy toward a magnet. 3:01 in the morning. On the bridge of the Admiral Kulakov, Captain Levchenko was facing the same reality. His ship was drifting from the opposite direction. The two destroyers were being drawn toward each other by the gravitational or magnetic wake of the spire. "If we continue this track, we will collide with the Americans in 10 minutes, the Russian executive officer warned. "We must launch the lifeboats. We must get the men off the ship." "No," Levchenko said. "If we abandon ship, we lose everything. We have manual signaling lamps. Fetch the signalman. I want to talk to the Americans. We have to coordinate." A moment later, a bright, stuttering light began to blink. From the bridge of the Admiral Kulakov. It was Morse code. It was the oldest form of naval communication. It was the only thing that still worked. 3:03 in the morning. Inside the dark combat information center of the Churchill, Petty Officer Miller heard the sound. It was no longer a low thrum. It was a melody. It was a series of mathematical tones that echoed through the deck plates. It was beautiful. It was also deafening. "It is singing," Miller said. He was sitting on the floor, his back against his dead console. "It is not a machine. It is a broadcast." "What is it saying, Miller?" the tactical action officer asked. "It is not words," Miller replied. "It is coordinates. It is mapping the stars." Vance returned to the CIC. She carried a heavy, battery-powered lantern. The light cast long, dancing shadows against the walls. "The Russians are signaling. They want to know if we can deploy anchors. They are afraid of a collision." "Our anchors are electric, ma'am," the officer said. "The clutches are locked. We cannot drop them without power." "Then we use the emergency flares," Vance said. "Signal the Russians. Tell them to prepare for impact." "Not with us. With the spire." 3:05 in the morning. The USS Winston Churchill was now 100 meters from the base of the obsidian structure. The white light from the spire was so bright that Vance could see the individual rivets on the Russian ship a mile away. Suddenly, the green beam vanished. The hole in the clouds began to close. The singing stopped. The spire did not move, but the air around it began to shimmer. The translucent skin of the object turned from black to a deep, bruised purple. A ripple of energy moved across the surface of the water. It was a physical wave. The USS Winston Churchill began to tilt. The ship leaned 10 degrees to the port side, then 20. "Hold on!" Vance screamed. The world turned sideways. 3:10 in the morning. The Norwegian Sea. The tilt of the USS Winston Churchill slowed. Then, it reversed. The ship groaned as it settled back into the water with a heavy, rolling splash. On the bridge, Commander Vance found herself gripped to a railing. The silence of the dead ship was broken only by the sound of heavy breathing. "Status," Vance said. Her voice was raspy from the adrenaline. "The magnetic pull is gone," the helmsman replied. "We are no longer drifting toward the spire. We are moving away from it. The current is pushing us back." Vance looked toward the Russian ship. The Admiral Kulakov was also leveling out. The two destroyers were now 400 meters apart. They were no longer targets. They were survivors. 3:13 in the morning. The light from the spire began to change. The white radiance was fading into a deep, pulsing amber. The geometric patterns inside the translucent skin were moving faster now. They were spinning into a vortex at the center of the structure. Vance reached for a battery-powered handheld radio. It was an emergency unit with a range of only 5 miles. She tuned it to the International Distress Frequency. "Admiral Kulakov," Vance said into the radio. "This is Commander Vance on the Winston Churchill. Do you read me?" There was a long pause. Static hissed in the small speaker. Then, a voice cracked through the noise. It was Captain Levchenko. He sounded exhausted. "Winston Churchill. This is Admiral Kulakov. We read you. Our systems are non-functional. We have multiple injuries from the tilt. We have the same, Vance replied. Captain, my weapons are offline. My engines are cold. I have no intent to engage your vessel. Do you agree to a temporary ceasefire? Agreed, Levchenko said. We are not the masters of this sea tonight. Look at the spire. 3:15 in the morning. The amber light from the spire was now so intense it reflected off the hulls of both ships. The water around the base of the structure began to boil. But it was not steam. It was foam. The spire was not rising anymore. It was sinking. It was descending back into the hole it had created. As the base of the structure touched the water, the power on both ships flickered. Inside the Combat Information Center, the overhead lights blinked once, then twice. A low hum began to fill the room. The cooling fans for the sonar suite kicked in. The tactical displays rebooted with a series of sharp beeps. Power is returning, Miller shouted. He scrambled back to his seat. The magnetic field is collapsing. Systems are coming back online. Vance watched her screens. The radar sweep began to rotate. The infrared cameras cleared. She saw the spire. It was halfway submerged. It was moving down at the same impossible speed it had moved up. 3:18 in the morning. Miller, get a sonar track, Vance ordered. Miller pressed his headset to his ears. I have it. It is at 1,000 meters. 2,000. It is not just sinking. It is accelerating. It is heading back to the floor of the trench. The two captains watched through their cameras as the last tip of the obsidian spire vanished beneath the waves. The hole in the ocean closed with a final, violent surge of water. A massive rogue wave, 30 feet high, radiated out from the center. Brace, Vance commanded. The Winston Churchill rose and fell. As the wave passed under the hull, the ship stabilized. The Norwegian Sea returned to its natural state. The water was black. The wind was cold. The bioluminescent glow was gone. 3:20 in the morning. The tactical display was now fully functional. Two green icons sat a mile apart on the screen. The foreign military destroyer and the naval warship. The foreign military vessel is moving, the tactical officer reported. They are turning to an easterly heading. Speed 5 knots. Vance picked up the radio again. Admiral Kulakov. This is Winston Churchill. We are resuming our patrol. We will maintain our distance. Copy. Winston Churchill, Levchenko replied. We are heading for foreign military headquarters. I think we have seen enough for one night. Agreed, Vance said. The two ships moved away from each other in the dark. There were no more radar locks. There were no more missiles in the air. But as Vance looked at her sonar display, she saw a single, faint contact. It was 7,000 meters down. It was stationary, and it was still singing. 8:30 in the morning. The Norwegian Sea. The USS Winston Churchill moved south through a heavy, rolling fog. The morning light was a pale gray, barely penetrating the thick mist that clung to the water. The ship was no longer at general quarters. The crew had been stood down, but there was no sense of relief. Instead, there was a profound and heavy silence. The sailors moved through the hallways like ghosts. They did not talk about what they had seen. They did not talk about the Russian missile that had turned into dust. Commander Vance stood on the bridge wing. Her face was lined with exhaustion. She watched the wake of the ship, a white scar on the black water. Her hands gripped the cold metal railing until her knuckles were white. She was looking at the spot on the horizon where the spire had vanished. Inside the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere was clinical. The power was stable. The tactical displays were bright and clear. But the room felt different. The technicians worked in total silence. They were running diagnostic after diagnostic, searching for a trace of the energy that had paralyzed the ship. They found nothing. There were no fried circuits. There was no physical evidence of an electromagnetic pulse. The ship was perfectly healthy. It was as if the event had never happened. Petty Officer Miller sat at his sonar console. He was not wearing his headset. He was staring at the blank waterfall display. He had a notebook open on his lap. In it, he had tried to sketch the mathematical patterns of the singing he had heard. The lines were jagged and complex. They looked like a map of a city that didn't exist. He knew that the intelligence officers would take the notebook. He knew they would tell him he had experienced a sensory hallucination caused by extreme stress. But Miller knew the truth. He had heard the heartbeat of the world. 11:15 in the morning. The Defense Headquarters Facility, Washington, D.C. Deep underground, in a secure conference room, the Joint Chiefs of Staff sat around a mahogany table. On the wall was a high-resolution satellite image. It was time-stamped 2:56 in the morning. It showed the Norwegian Sea. In the center of the frame was a perfect, glowing circle of white light. Two destroyers were visible on the periphery, looking like tiny splinters of wood against the radiance. The foreign military forces are calling it a navigational hazard, a colonel said. They have already issued a formal statement. They are claiming a pocket of methane gas ignited beneath the surface. And our statement, a general asked. Atmospheric disturbance, the colonel replied. A rare form of maritime lightning. We are sticking to the script. The foreign military vessel and the military forces were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The general leaned back in his chair. He looked at the image of the spire. It was a dark, blurred shape at the center of the light. We are lying to the world, and we are lying to ourselves. We have the telemetry from the military forces. We saw those missiles dissolve. We saw the laws of physics suspended for 3 minutes. The public cannot handle this, the colonel said. If we admit that something came out of the trench and neutralized 2 of the most advanced warships in history, the stock markets will collapse by noon. We bury it, we classify it, we move on. 3 days later, the North Atlantic, the USS Winston Churchill arrived at its home port. The arrival was quiet. There were no cameras. There were no families waiting on the pier. The ship was immediately moved to a restricted dry dock. Men in suits without name tags boarded the vessel before the bow was even fully secured. Commander Vance sat in her cabin. She was looking at a final report. It was a thick stack of paper, filled with technical jargon and redacted paragraphs. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic erasure. It described a tense encounter with a foreign military vessel. It described a weather event. It did not mention the hole in the ocean. It did not mention the green beam of light that had reached for the stars. She picked up a pen and signed her name at the bottom of the last page. As she did, she felt a slight vibration in the floor. It was a low, resonant thrum. It lasted for only a second. It might have been the ship's generators. It might have been the wind. But Vance knew better. Modern warfare is a game of numbers. We count our missiles. We measure our range. We believe that we are the apex predators of the planet. But the Norwegian Sea had provided a correction. The ocean is not a battlefield. It is a veil. And beneath that veil, something is waiting. The 2 most powerful navies on Earth had been ready to start a world war over a patch of cold water. They had been stopped by a force that did not use weapons. It did not use violence. It simply removed the possibility of conflict. It turned their fire into snow and their power into silence. Vance walked to her porthole and looked out at the gray Atlantic. The water was calm. It looked like polished glass, but she knew what was down there. She knew that the spire was still there, sitting in the dark, miles below the surface. It was not a weapon. It was a sentinel. We are not alone in the dark, and whatever is watching us is not finished.